I'm Faiza Abram-Smith from the Institute for Journalism, and I will be moderating this session. I will give you a brief overview, and then I will introduce the panelists. Okay? Panelists, you each have your mic, if you need your turn to speak. I think this is a very interesting session, Hezekiel. I'm just a bit perturbed that there's so few people in here. There's more people outside. The purpose of this session is the overview of SADC media landscape, challenges and opportunities for the SDGs. Now, as you all know, we've had the Millennium Development Goals, and now we have the SDGs, and there's 17 of them. And we've got quite an interesting panel. We have Mr. Laksan Chipare, Chairperson, MISA Regional Office, Namibia, on my right, with a cap. And then we have Professor Frans Kruger, Freedom of Expression Institute, South Africa, on my far right, from Wits University. On my left, we have Professor Sheila Muzi, Professor at the University of Limpopo. And on my far left, we have Delta Milaya Ndau from Zimbabwe. And she's a blogger, ex-Online Herald editor of Zimbabwe. I think this is going to be quite a stimulating session. I'll just consult briefly because we have an hour, I think almost 2 hours. If I could give you each perhaps 10 to 15 minutes, would that be fine, or would you need a bit more? Less? Okay. So we'll have more time for discussion, which I think would be good. So I'll hand over to Laksan Chipare, who will be speaking on the state of free expression, press independence, journalist safety and access to information in SADC. Mr. Chipare, I'm handing over to you.
Hello? Yes. Hey, good morning. And a happy Adwai. Idwai, do you know about that? Ah, today is international. Right, can you finish? International Day of Universal Access to Information, the 29th of September, 28th of September. All right? I'll talk about that more than the other issues that I'm supposed to cover. Right, going to the issues that I'm supposed to cover because of the time that we have, my topic is actually around state of free expression, press independence, which should actually be media independence, journalist safety and access to information in SADC. As you heard, I'm from the Media Institute of Southern Africa, which is now just over 26 years old. So in that capacity, I'm the chair of the board. In that capacity, MISA has indeed been on the forefront of dealing with some of these issues. In fact, I'll go on to say that with respect to the issue of free expression, I would say that this area is not as effectively monitored as it should be. From our perspective, we did a lot of advocacy on it, managed to get it on the radar with International Freedom of Expression Exchange, which is an organization of the world, most of the organizations, over 100 organizations as of today, that are involved with free expression internationally. Having got that on accepted as a major issue that needed to be monitored and reported on and covered, we are not happy with the actual outcome of monitoring for free expression, because free expression is for everyone, and not just the media. In order for us to be able to get information around the denial or constraints placed on free expression, it will require a lot more of us. I think we are commonly referred to as human rights defenders, because this is a human rights issue. We should be more of us, and we should be getting every citizen to contribute, because if they are denied access to free expression, they are not able to freely express themselves, and because of that, they actually are denied their human rights. So it will be incumbent on those of us that are human rights defenders to be able to provide information as to where there has been denial of access to information. Access to free expression, or just the effects of denial of free expression. So that area is not as well as effectively monitored as it should be. The second and the third item, which are media independence and journalist safety, are areas that MISA has been involved with in the SADC and internationally, and we have done this since 1994. Those of you who are familiar with MISA will recall that every World Press Freedom Day, which is the 3rd of May, we publish a report which is called, ironically, So This is Democracy. Now, the genesis of that title goes back to the Windhoek Declaration. Some of you may be familiar with that, which was in 1991. And that was a major breakthrough for media worldwide, not just in Africa, because it ended up giving us, through a lot of work by organizations like ourselves, having the United Nations actually adopting the World Press Freedom Day in 1993, which is now widely known of. So we continue to do that. We used to publish that report. So we monitor media freedom and journalists, harassment, safety, and issues like that. And we would publish that information as it happens. And then at the end of the year, we compile a report which was actually printed and called So This is Democracy, the state of media freedom in Southern Africa. And you will be able to get that online on the MISA.org website. And some of you who are on the mailing list will normally get that information because we send it out. The fourth issue, which is access to information, is the one that I'm going to deal with more because of today. Because today is Idwai, right? You got it? Can you say what it is? Right. The day of international universal access to information. How did we come there? MISA, together with other free expression organizations, started this process around 2009. This was work that MISA had been doing as early as 2000, when we started our programs and had a program on your right to know, which we later changed to right to access to information, and in which we have been campaigning for our countries to actually provide that guarantee of access to information to citizens through policies and legislation. You would know that most of our countries do have constitutions that provide, as a fundamental right, freedom of expression. And freedom of expression also includes, in some countries specifically, they actually go on to say freedom of information. While others, it is subsumed under freedom of expression. Because for you to be able to express yourself, you must have information on the issues that you are going to talk about. In case you end up saying things that really are not meant for that part, for you to be saying, because you lack information. Now, as I said, we have been campaigning since 2009 under the auspices of the what we call API, which is the African Platform for Access to Information. And MISA was the coordinator of the working group, which led to the Cape Town conference that some of you would have attended in 2011. And then later on, we engaged with UNESCO, and together with UNESCO, with the working group, managed to get our governments in Africa to actually champion with UNESCO the acceptance of this day. And that was done last year for the first time that it is now on the UNESCO calendar. And as we speak now, some of our colleagues are actually were in America for the UN, which is for the annual UN gathering focusing on the Sustainable Development Goals. And with that, we are campaigning that this day be recognized as a UN day similar to World Press Freedom Day. Now, this issue is very important in that access to information is critical for any development to take place. Because if you have no information about what is going on, how can you then be in a position to develop yourself individually or even the nation to develop? Because this information will help citizens to actually their own information and also public information that they need to be able to access to enable themselves to fight for their rights, and also even to know what's going on within their localities, within their sphere of it could be industry, it could be in the market, what we call the marketplace, it could be socially, it could be all sorts of things that are affected. Now, the acceptance and the acceptance by the nations coming back to the Sustainable Development Goals. And in this time, we among others, with others internationally, managed to get the target that we commonly refer to as 1610, which is and I'll just for those who may, I'll just quote you what that 1610 is the one that says that there should be access to information. But the problem is that they also go to say that it should be under national and international kind of standards. Unfortunately, I would accept that because this is a UN declaration. It is very brief. It doesn't quite say what it should be. But those of you from, of course, the majority of you from Africa will know that this is provided for under the African Commission for Human and People's Rights Declaration on Freedom of Expression in Africa, which clearly specifies that state parties must ensure that citizens have access to information by providing laws that provide for that. As of today, and earlier on, those of you who were in the room, when Advocate Pansi Takula talked about this, you will be aware that we now have 22 countries in Africa that have access to information laws. Now that we are talking about SADC, there are actually 6 countries in SADC who have access to information, which have got access to information laws out of the 14 SADC countries. I'm sure you'll be aware that the first one in the region to have that law is South Africa in 2000, and then the latest one is Malawi, which did it this year. We still are, MISA has been leading this campaign for laws to be put in place so that citizens can demand access to information. But we have not only stopped in we have not only focused on advocating for that, we have also gone on to put programs to monitor access to information within public information within the region. For those countries that we are able to do research, we did the research and it was published today. I don't know whether There is she's going to show you the overview of the report that we have just launched today, which is the MISA project called the Golden Key and Padlocks. Are we getting there? Is there someone? Is it? Okay, they are working on it. You get to see it. So what we do is we actually engage public bodies within the countries that we do the research, and we would really want to involve as many of you human rights defenders as possible to be part of the project that enables us to assess as to what extent our governments are providing citizens with access to information, and that you see from the overview, that report. Now, in terms of the SDGs, what is important is that I'm just giving you the background of some of the things that we have done in terms of advocacy to ensure that the fundamental rights that we as citizens should have are made available through policies and legislation. Now, what we have here is a situation where our governments have signed on to the SDGs. And we as citizens need to engage them to see to what extent we get information as to how each and every one of our countries are progressing towards the achievement of the SDGs. So the opportunity for advocacy is there by pursuing the issues that we are passionate about. Now, as you know, there are 17 SDGs, right? You would have maybe a number of them that you are interested in. So what you need is to be able to get information around progress for achieving those. So the advocacy part is how do we enable ourselves to get informed as individuals and as groups of citizens or groups of people interested in that. Just for going back to that, that is the report that you will see, which is said MISA Transparency Assessment. And it will show you the countries that we have done them in as you go down. And then those countries, we today are going to be giving those institutions that we have assessed to be the ones that provide information, and we give them the golden key. So those that we feel are the least transparent will get a golden padlock. We have had situations where when we try and give these keys, of course the government or the institution concerned will refuse to accept the golden padlock. But our research shows that they are the least transparent in that country from the countries that we have assessed. So those are the countries, that's the report. You can go to each of those countries and you'll be able to see that. I don't know whether you'll be able to see, but if you go to the MISA website, you'll be able to access the report going on. So, what are the opportunities? The opportunities are there for us to follow through on the issues that we are passionate about within the SDG setup. How do we make use of those opportunities? It is incumbent on us to involve ourselves in programs that enable us to monitor the progress. Now, I think we can work together in providing, particularly working with our academic institutions, getting people to help us come up with what you call the monitoring tools that enable us to monitor and be able to then provide evidence-based advocacy, where we actually say, like this is evidence-based advocacy. You can go to that government department, which is listed in that report, and actually follow through and say, but this is what is obtained based on research. It is always good to have research in order for you to do advocacy. That's very important. We can also be looking at how do we get trained to do advocacy. And that is very important. I hope that we'll be able to have time to share on those issues. My time is running out. I think I'll stop there and then engage with you as we go forward. I thank you.
Thank you, Lakson. That was very interesting. I just want to check with the House. Should we have all four our panelists do their presentations, and then we will open for questions and discussion. Would that be fine? Okay. So if you have any burning question, note it down so that you don't forget to ask the panelists. I know in our program we've got Franz Kruger next, but I'm going to ask Professor Sheila Muzi to speak. I'm just trying to do a bit of a gender balance. So Professor Muzi will talk on strengthening media credibility through professionalism and ethical standards. I also just want to allude, let us make sure that we bear in mind what the 17 SDGs are. And just to note what people are presenting, and also to see how we can draw some strings, how we can make sure that what we're talking about, how we can take the 17 SDGs into consideration and flesh it out, you know, beyond this discussion. Because I think the SDGs are there, but it's up to us here to make sure that it works, to make sure that we incorporate it in all our areas of work, so that we are actually able to make inroads. Okay, Professor, I'm handing over to you.
Thank you, Program Director. Good morning, it's good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am from the University of Limpopo. I'm the UNESCO Community Media Sustainability Chair. So what I'm going to talk about is experiences from the community media sector mainly. My examples would be coming from the community media sector. But before I get there, I need to remind us, like the program director said, that we have 17 SDGs, and well, SDGs now stands for Sustainable Development Goals. As we know, we come from the Millennium Development Goals. SDG number 1 is no poverty. I won't read them all, but number 2 is zero hunger. Number 3 is good health and well-being. The reason I've read these 3 is to also show you that these SDGs deal with cross-cutting issues. Because for me, zero hunger also means no poverty. They are related. And then we have gender equality, which is SDG number 5. I've worked with Gender Links on this issue, SDG number 5. But it's also related to quality education, because we have to educate our girls in order to have a better future. So this is the one opportunity we have as media when we play our role of information, dissemination, and educating our people around the SDGs. So this implies that the media, as it plays its role, we expect the media to understand the Sustainable Development Goals, to understand even their relatedness, to know what they all mean, how they translate for that particular locality. What are the SDGs that can be highlighted in your area of operation? Now, since I said I'm coming from a community media background, I'm thinking the community radio stations are closer to the people. And so being closer to the people, they're even closer in language. So for me, there's an opportunity for community media, not only radio, but also newspapers, to inform, to educate, and to get their people to participate, their communities to participate on the issues of sustainable development goals that affect those communities. And they will be doing those in their own language, you know. And the state of the media in South Africa is such that we have over 169 community radio stations. We have quite a number of small newspapers which publish in the indigenous African languages. So here's an opportunity of content development whereby these development issues will have to be highlighted for the community media to handle. So what I want to say is that the state of media in South Africa is quite positive when you look at what are the opportunities. The opportunities are that we have a variety, we have diversity of media in South Africa. And we have media that is organized. So when I say organized, I mean they are organized into, we have a National Community Radio Forum. We have the Media Development and Diversity Agency, which means this is an opportunity. We have government which has set up the MDDA through an act to assist the small media, to assist community media with financial means and non-financial means. And these are opportunities for spreading or for disseminating information on the SDGs, which means we will have to do a paradigm shift. It's an opportunity where now we will highlight the development, the SDGs. That will be our content development. We will have to develop capacity in the community media in order to handle those. These are opportunities. Then we have academic institutions. Where I come from, that's why I'm stressing community media. The chair is about community media. So what did we do? We have developed accredited short courses. Now I'm speaking from a tertiary education point of view. We actually have a 6-month certificate on community media sustainability. So what it will mean is that as the UNESCO chair, we may have to look at partnerships with NGOs, with development agencies, to infuse now SDGs into our courses, into the curriculum. And I've seen this work because I have worked with gender links, and what we did, that time it was MDG 3. Since 2010, we had been working with gender links to mainstream the gender agenda into community media. We did that in Limpopo province, where I come from. But not only that, we mainstream gender in the curriculum of media studies, so that that's bringing professionalism into the SDG. What do we mean by that? Because you cannot disseminate information that you do not know. That's what I'm trying to say. So these are opportunities. So what it will mean for me to make the media professional in handling the SDGs, in playing its role in order to implement the 2030 agenda of the UN, is that there will be a need to professionalize and build credibility, because you can only listen to people who know about what they are talking about. So this would mean capacity development for mainstream media and community media in terms of what are these sustainability development goals. And actually capacity development in terms of packaging these to make them accessible to our communities, so that, and accessible, I mean in simple English, but in addition in their African languages. So this will be the role, to localize the information for our communities to be able to handle this and to be able to participate. You know, youth can phone in, these people can be a part of what affects them in society and question their governments on issues that affect them that are outlined in the SDGs. And for me, that's building credibility around the media. And I'm saying it's both for mainstream media and for community media. And then professionalism is not only about knowledge and content, you know, but it's also, according to the Bali 2014 roadmap, it's also about infrastructure. And I'm going to highlight community radio. You find issues of signal. You know, you find that their technology is failing. I mean, how can you be professional when, you know, sometimes you are on, sometimes you are off. You are not being professional. And in a similar comparison is, if you look at community newspapers or small independent newspapers, if you don't deliver your newspaper on time, you are failing the advertisers, isn't it? So for me, that's not being professional. So by saying we're going to strengthen, we'll have to strengthen professionalism and ethical standards in community media for them to handle the SDGs. It means we are going to capacitate. We will have to capacitate this. And somehow, somewhere, funding is not being mentioned. The challenges that are faced by community media are, a lot of them are financial, a lot of them about sustainability. Sustainability that also involves finance. So we will all have to hold hands. NGOs, UNESCO itself, I know they don't fund certain things, but NGOs, potential donors, this is where we have to hold hands and capacitate everybody so that we can achieve the UN 2030 agenda. I pause here. Thank you, Ms. Program Director.
Professor Muzi. I think there's a lot to chew on there, and we can start thinking more about it. What is the role of the UNESCO chair? So I think we know the UNESCO chair was hosted at the University of Rhodes University for quite some time, and now it's being hosted at the University of Limpopo. So I want us to think exactly about what Professor Muzi said, but also for us to move beyond that. What is the role of the UNESCO chair? So where it's based now, who's hosting it, but what is the mandate of that chair? I'd like us to have a discussion on that a bit later. I'd like to hand over now to Professor Franz Kruger from Wits University, who's basically going to be talking on partnerships for media advocacy. We saw Lakshman Chipare spoke a lot about advocacy. He mentioned all the publications that's available online. Professor Muzi elaborated quite a bit on the SDGs and how we can use it as content at the community level, especially using the different languages that is accessible to the majority of people where they find themselves. So Professor Kruger, you're on board now for Partnerships for Media Advocacy.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. It seems to me that Laksan has spoken extensively about advocacy and the excellent work that MISA is doing across the region. And maybe we can pick up on those topics in the discussion further. And if you'll allow me, I'll take a slightly different tack, which nevertheless speaks to the topic of the media landscape and its impact on these issues. So, you know, I was looking at the topic of access, this phrase, access to information. And it echoes, you know, the notion of internet freedom. And what I want to say is that while I think it's a really excellent starting point, I think we may have to revisit it. In some senses, of course, we need to start with making sure that citizens are able to access the information that they need. But it's kind of passive. And I think there are new developments which we need to take into account, which actually, which need building into these concepts. When we talk access to information, we talk about transparent government, we talk about resistance to censorship, we talk about a free regulatory environment, all of these kinds of things. And what that doesn't take into account is the active misuse that we find of information and technical tools in order to confuse, right? There are new threats. I mean, if we rather than talking about access to information, if we think about citizens' ability to use information to exercise their rights, to work on the SDGs, to do all these good things, then we've got to say to ourselves, it's not just about access, not just about opening a door, it's about dealing with threats that of people, of groups who are walking through that very door, but using it for bad, for ill, right? So let me just cite one or two examples, and we can, you know, if you like, we can take that further in the discussion. We live in an age of fake news. We have a president of probably the most powerful country in the world who has simply declared himself the arbiter of what is true and what is not, to such an extent that American journalists are scrambling to run ticker tapes underneath TV reports saying, hi, this is actually untrue, we've proved this several times, and it just doesn't matter, you know. We've had similar kinds of things emerging in the Kenyan election, we're closer to home, where doctored videotape was put out there precisely in order to confuse. That is using internet freedom, but it is using it in a way that is really harmful and difficult. Closer to home in South Africa, we've had the whole saga of Bell Pottinger, and I mean, I'm not sure exactly how many of you are from South Africans and how many of you are from elsewhere, but I'm guessing most of you will be aware of the way in which a British PR company got weighed into South Africa's public discourse, and specifically and in a directed and systematic way injected false content into the public discourse in order to further political ends. That's a real problem. I mean, of course, the South African story of Bell Pottinger is quite a hopeful one. In fact, there was such resistance and such an outcry that the company itself may now collapse. We have seen the use of leaks as weapons. This is a common thing in South African politics. And as we build up to the ANC's conference at the end of the year, we will see more of it, more and more of it as we go along. It's the weaponization of information, right? Using open information, using the channels, the technical opportunities that people have in order to fight wars. Now, what does that say to the way in which the media should operate and the way in which journalists should do their job? It seems to me that there are real difficult questions to ask that we need to address. The third thing that I want to mention in this context is that what we're seeing in several countries is the state's misuse of its regulatory and its economic power in a sneaky way to make sure that there are friendly voices on the media landscape. We've seen that in Zimbabwe, where early kind of licensing of commercial radio stations have consistently gone to friends of the government. The Angolan trajectory from some years ago, that's what's been happening, where friends of the government have been given access to licensing, to media platforms and unfriendly voices have had action taken against them. And I think we've seen that in South Africa. We've seen that with the kind of use of state advertising money to support media platforms that are seen as friendly to the government. And I mean, I think this is a point where we have a discussion around community media, because much as Professor Musi talks about, the state's role through the MDDA and so on, and I think in principle that's a very good thing, but we have to be alive to the fact that state money is being used in the community media space in a way that undermines community media's ability to be independent and truly serve the communities where they're situated. And I think that that's quite a deliberate thing. A couple of years ago, a station in Sasolburg was burnt down because it wasn't playing the game. And what we've seen is its revival, but with state money and state support, all good stuff, but in a way where it is now quite tame, I think. It's a complicated matter, and I don't want to suggest that it's a black and white, simple set of circumstances. But nevertheless, what I'm saying is that the use of state resources, advertising budgets, municipal premises, these kinds of things are also a way which impact on citizens' access to information. So where does that leave us? I mean, I think that the key to thinking about this is really by thinking about it in terms of public trust. I mean, I said earlier on that for me the more useful attitude, the more useful starting point is to say, do our citizens have and can they use the information that they need to exercise their rights? Now, part of the answer to that must be this concept of trust. You need to be able to trust the information that you're getting. And there, where we're talking about this weaponization of information, where we're talking about fake news, where we're talking about leaks, these kinds of things, it undermines that trust in a very profound way. Let me pause there. So just my point really is that we need to think beyond access. We need to think beyond, to look at the new threats which impinge on citizens' ability to really deploy the information that they need in the way that they should.
Kruger's also alluded to, the technology is there, but how does this technology get used? How do citizens understand the use of it? We're also aware of the cost of it. We're also aware of the ethics that at times get involved in it. I'm handing over to you now.
All right, thank you very much and good afternoon. My name is Delta Lau Mirayando. I'm from Zimbabwe. I want to talk about digital advocacy, specifically how you can get your messaging to filter to mainstream media. And this is important because even though we like to romanticize social media and how powerful it is and what it can do, in most cases, in the context of Africa, you'll find that mainstream media is still the medium of the elite. It is still the platform to which the elites turn to. And you want your messages to reach those people. Mainstream media is the mirror that the elites use to gaze at themselves. So to get their attention, you can use social media to influence the agenda of mainstream media. And how do you do this? Typically, digital advocacy manifests in two ways. There is what I call organic advocacy, and there is what I call strategic advocacy. Organic advocacy is the advocacy that's personal. It's an individual who is invested in something. It's their lived experience. So whether they're blogging from a place of, this is the life I am living. This is what I am going through. This is what's happening in my community, in my life, in my society. This is what's hurting me. So they are pushed mainly by their own lived experience. And then you have what I call the activists, right? They can be one and the same, but the main difference with the activist is that the activist doesn't care whether or not that experience is their own. The activist is moved by conviction, by their ideological standpoint. If they believe in social justice, they don't care that it is not them who is affected. So they are the person who will step in and say, I'm going to speak up about this issue because I believe it's wrong or I believe it's right. And social media has been powerful, especially in the space of activism, because it allows like-minded individuals to find one another and to connect and to amplify each other's voices. And what does that do in the context of social media? It creates hashtags that trend, for example. The kind of hashtags that cannot be ignored by mainstream media. In a typical newsroom scenario, I'm more from a print background and also the digital operations within a media house. In a typical newsroom, reporters will come in every morning and say, these are the stories we want to write. And then those stories are then discussed by the editors, the senior, the supervisor, to say, okay, this works, this doesn't work. So what you need to do as somebody who's using social media for advocacy is to ask yourself, how do I get this reporter to notice this issue? Because these reporters are there on the platforms that you're on. And they're reporters who are looking for issues that they can, write on. It's their profession. It's something they need to do. I'll give an example of what I would regard as organic advocacy, for example. We've got Pastor Ivan Mawaride, this flag. When he started, one of his early videos, he says, I'm quoting in part, he says, I'm not a politician, I'm not an activist, just a citizen. And in the early days of reportage around Ivan Mawara, he was referred to as the accidental activist. Because this is a guy who just felt pain about something and then thought, you know what, this is my lived experience, this is how I feel, this is what I'm going to say. He had not anticipated that it would resonate with so many people who would also amplify what he had to say. And then another example of what I would regard as organic advocacy is a Twitter conversation that happened in 2015. I read a story in one of the publications about a man who was fined a cow for having, for raping really a 14-year-old. So I was so upset about that. I said, you know, people, when they steal cows in this country, they go to jail for about 10 years. But you sleep with a 14-year-old and they're like, no, it's fine, it's a slap on the wrist. And one lawyer was on my timeline said to me, well, but that's the law. The law in Zimbabwe says this, the age of consent is 12 in Zimbabwe. And I said, that can't be right. So we had this heated argument. But this person is a lawyer. They know the law. And so I tagged other lawyers. I said, look at this, like, correct your colleague. And the other lawyer said, actually, he's right. Because the legal system in Zimbabwe, the laws are so tangled up. And it was such a scandal because the rest of us were not aware. The story was then picked up by a national newspaper. One reporter who had been following the conversation then met with the Attorney General on a separate interview and ambushed him with that question. She asked, so what's the age of consent? He said it's 12 years. And that was a splash story. So it was raging for days on days. Because you find there's so much we don't know. And then when we do know it, we want something to be done. We want it to be changed. We want our legislators to do something. But the typical MP might not be on Twitter, might not be on Facebook. But if you're humiliating them on the front pages of the mainstream media, this is a problem. Because their images matter to them. Through social media advocacy, you can apply reputational pressure on any institution, on any individual. You can shame them into doing the right thing if that's what is required. And in some instances, you don't have to shame them. In some instances, you can speak to individuals who are within their networks, who can pass along the message. In Zimbabwe, some of the politicians who are on Twitter or on Facebook usually confess that they joined the platforms because their children told them to. So sometimes on social media, you won't meet that big politician you need to access, but their children could be there. Include them in those conversations without harassing them, without abusing them, without attacking them. Because there's so many ways to get access, but you need to be strategic. And then in terms of how you can inject the SDG goals into reportage, The typical newsroom setup is that they are what are known as beats. Basically, news is segmented. There's the health beat, there's the environment beat, there's the agriculture beat, etc. All the SDGs fall within one or other category in any typical newsroom. And most reporters who are assigned a beat become experts and they become passionate about that. They become advocacy journalists, more or less. And those are people you can tag in your issues. You find a burst pipe in your neighborhood, take a picture and tag an environment reporter and say, hey, so what does this mean for the community that's living here? Children are playing in sewage. What's going to happen? You see a burst pipe, take a picture. You see a pothole, take a picture. And reporters love shaming people in power. They'll take a pothole and they'll take the politician's big car and say, look, they're driving these fancy cars and look at what the roads are like. But you need to be able to have those conversations. And that kind of approach would be what then I would refer to as the strategic approach. Because you're making a conscious decision to take somebody, to reach out to somebody, you want to draw their attention to an issue. And then when it comes to the kinds of journalism that are susceptible or more malleable for you to be able to have SDGs injected in them, you've got advocacy journalism, for example. And advocacy journalism is the kind of journalism that's deliberately non-objective. But it's based on facts, so that's what differentiates it from propaganda. You've been told that journalism is about being objective, but advocacy journalism is not about being, it's about taking a stand on an issue. So it's very issue-based. And then you've got solutions journalism, which we don't have much of yet, well, at least not as evident. And solutions journalism is the journalism that looks at the problems, looks at the solutions, and asks the questions as to why is this working and why is that not working. And you need to be able to link that sort of craft to the messaging around the SDGs. And then there's also developmental journalism. And with developmental journalism, it's just about promoting social development. And a lot of the SDGs are tied into these issues. It's already been said that they're cross-cutting. It's very intersectional. And that's the same thing you'll find mirrored in many newsrooms. So if you're going to use social media, think about who are the influencers on your platforms. I was looking at, I remember hashtags like Occupy the Playground, I think it was in Kenya, right? And some of the coverage from BBC and Reuters were quoting social media influencers. So mainstream media reporters do go and source social media. They look for voices. They ask themselves who can speak about these issues, who can articulate these issues. So you do need to position yourself as people who are experts in their areas, as people who are available to offer comment. Because you get tired of, you know, the kind of reporting that says, well, anonymous sources, insiders said, unnamed, you know, sources said. So if you want to be able to have visibility, in as much as social media will give you the global reach, if you want to impact the community, you will need the media that the elites pay attention to, or rather the media that the elites cannot ignore. Because if mainstream media has your face splattered on the front page for a whole week about an issue, believe you me, that politician is not sleeping. Because it's hurting them, it's now personal. So find ways to make the issues pertaining to SDGs personal to the policymakers, to the politicians, to those in local governance, and to those who hold powers, and those who are supposed to hold accountable. Thank you.
Thank you to all four panelists. I think there's lots of food for thought here. Thank you also, Delta. I almost missed one of the most important speakers. I think your input was crucial, especially around how social media can be used as a win-win, as a positive platform. Because I think we've got, besides Donald Trump, we've got a lot of people using social media. But I think we need to train more activists, we need to train more journalists on the importance of this platform and how critically this platform can be used to take us forward, especially to make an impact with the SDGs. I also think it's crucial that now that we have our discussion and we see how we can incorporate these SDGs. But I also just want to allude to people after lunch, we're going further into understanding the SDGs and issues for media advocacy. There's 2 sessions that's following. The follow-up session after that one will also be how can the media be more engaged to support the SDGs implementation. And I think these 4 panelists have tabled and brought a lot of the information that will impact on the other 2 sessions. So even if we don't address it fully here, the discussion can be taken forward into the next sessions. I will hand over now for questions. I see one hand on my left. Anyone else? Note your hand. I'll take one more hand. Okay, there's just those 2. I'm handing over to you. Just identify yourself and which media you're from.
Thanks. I think my name is Mashile Palani. I'm coming from Limpopo province in Zanin, representing Vatlabina Foundation. But the organization is also the publisher for the iNews, which is a community newspaper. My question is to Professor Musi. Sustainability of the community media is a question, is a big issue, especially in Limpopo, because it's where we find a lot of people are in poverty. When you look at the statistics South Africa, a lot of people now in Limpopo, definitely they're in rural areas and they're in poverty now, currently. But to report on that is that we as the publishers, we find it difficult because firstly is that to print 10,000 community newspapers is very expensive, but we don't have support for that. The advertisement which can sustain us is going somewhere else. I mean, we find that government communicators in Limpopo mostly, they are sourcing advertisement for their friends, not for the real newspapers which we know in Limpopo. So my question is that how can we turn around that? Because we cannot rely on MDDA, because we cannot rely on that. So how can we turn around the strategy? How can we help us to get more advertisement generally, especially from government? GCIS is bankrupt. I mean, you see that they don't even support us. So they are being captured. Actually, they are being captured. So now what's happened is that we find in a difficult time and we want to report on SDGs. Thanks.
Hi, Jimmy Kainja from Malawi, University of Malawi. Just wanted to comment about access to information. I think he mentioned about 22 African countries having laws that guarantee access to information. Just want to mention it that I think it's becoming a trend now that most of these countries actually guarantee freedoms in principle, but not in practice. You mentioned Malawi there. The law is guaranteed, but there are no mechanisms in place in which anyone can go actually to demand any public, any government-held information, because there is no any mechanisms in place. And the signs are nothing is going to be done anytime soon. The law itself took 12 years to be passed, and I would not be surprised if it takes another 15 years for this to work out. So I think as MISA, your job starts here. It's not done yet, and I just wanted to comment to that. I think we should have this in mind as an institution as well. Thank you.
If you can just try to give your own opinion, I don't think you'll be able to answer that question fully.
Yes, thank you, Program Director. That question is very, very difficult to answer. But I will say, much as I said, we have opportunities in South Africa. We do have the MDDA, right? But right now, there is a problem at the MDDA, governance problems. So it's a government agency. And now the Department of Communications has put a scheme together. It was for discussion, a support scheme for community radio. And it was discussed at some point. We did not, you know, it's where they want to fund from the government, straight from, not through the agency. Well, some money will go to the MDDA, but that scheme is not getting enough support on the ground. So it's stalling. But we are also, you know, discussing it as, you know, I'm one of the partners of the, through the DOC. But what is happening is that it's politicized in the sector. There's a lot of politics surrounding that. Yes, government is here saying, here's money to assist you. And if you read that document, it says up to any amount depending on the proposal you have written. At the same time, we have in community media, community radio, we have people not being able to put those proposals together, those grants together to get money. And at the same time, much as the MDDA can throw money there, not everybody is benefiting from that. Maybe if you have 100 applicants, only 10 community radio stations will get something. But we are saying there's money there, but it's not for everybody. Talking about funding, that's why some of the training that is given by partners involves marketing and advertising. It's so not to make you forever dependent on funders, to make yourself sustainable as well as community media. So it's a difficult one to answer because you won't forever be supported even by other funding agencies forever. They kickstarting you, they're helping to, you know, you can't be forever dependent. And we have been talking as the community media chair, UNESCO community media chair, just to answer Faiza's question. One of the things is to look for training programs that we can give to community media for sustainability. It's not to give money. We don't even have money to run the chair. But it's to identify independent service providers out there and to find funding for them to do that. But for them to make you independent as well. So it means we have together, even with you, to think of, we call it resource mobilization. We have to find a way to train you, community media, in issues of resource mobilization. How do you get money out there? And it is, why I said it's difficult to answer that question, the areas in which this community media operate, first of all, our people out there in the community don't believe in advertising. So there's already no money there. So it is complex, but the solution is going to come from all of us, not top down. We have to sit together and say, how do we resolve this one? Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll hand over to Laksen.
Yes, thank you, Faisal. I think we are very much aware that, I'm talking about MISA now, that the campaign for access to information is just beginning, but it's also started way back. Being very much aware that we needed to put in place the legal, what you call the legal framework, which is the policy and the law. Because in most cases, including Malawi, your constitution actually provides for it. But you will find that the law wasn't there, and now the law is there. So the next stage is how to implement the law. And you can get a lot of information about all the laws that are actually in place worldwide through accessing, there are people who actually monitor these laws and actually provide a rating as to the state of your law in your country, and also use that for you to be able to take the next step. But I think what we really need to do is now to be able to get to the citizens, to now get them involved in terms of ensuring that the law is implemented. And part of that is the information that we are giving you. And you will notice that Malawi was one of the countries that took part in our transparency research. And you'll be able to see to what extent which departments, which government agencies are not doing what they should be doing, and then use that to advocate that they be shamed and also be exposed and find ways in which. So all the issues that we are covering there can be advocated for further through use, as was said, through media, through all sorts of ways in which citizens can be able to advocate for changes to how things are happening. With respect to the issue that we just discussed about MDDA, we as MISA actually very much use the MDDA as an example of what countries should be doing in terms of ensuring that there is an agency that is able to help when it comes to media, especially at the community level. The fact that the MDD is having problems is actually an opportunity for you as South Africans to advocate for them to be transparent, for instance, about how this man is being shared. And then those reports can then be used. You are fortunate in South Africa, I must say. You have a public protector who has been very active around these issues. Approach them, make sure that they are able to put out reports, which then can be used to ensure that the MTDA operates to the benefit of the citizens. You should be able to get information around who are actually getting the money and what is happening with the money and the agency itself, because it's a public agency, it's established by law. This is a very good example that we are actually saying should be happening in all the countries that where we are. We are very much aware in most of the countries, particularly as you heard from our colleagues, that government in some countries, particularly example, for instance, in Zimbabwe, they are actually major players in media. And therefore, that media cannot be, it's not independent, it's not pluralistic, doesn't provide any information except for the benefit of the ruling elite. We should be able to get citizens to know that they can get better information if they actively are assisted to get advocacy at community level, to go on to regional level, and even at national level.
Thank you, Laksen. The gentleman, and then Koldia.
Hi, I'm a journalist from Cape Town. My name is Yazid, and my question is specifically for our colleague from Zimbabwe. We are talking about access to information and citizens' rights to access to information. Now, of course, the implementation of that is very important to talk about. In your country, or in your experience even, is blogging being viewed as a alternative information source by citizens, and is it viable even? Because bloggers are very often self-funded. We're talking about some funding issues came up here with community media as well. I'd like to know about your experience as a blogger and the challenges thereof of getting information out there. Thank you.
So I have two questions. Professor Kruger, very interesting about the weaponization or misuse of information, but I'm a firm believer that there's nothing called fake news. I think that we're having this conversation about fake news in response to the lack of public information. So my question is, does fake news actually exist? Because what I've seen is the mainstream media will then look for the official position. Can we say that in a way, what we're calling fake news motivates the accountability that we're not getting from the mainstream media? Because I also feel that mainstream media has also been in the forefront of misinformation. If you look at, for instance, issues relating to the cybercrimes law now, in terms of access to information and freedom of expression in Zimbabwe, and the statements that have been coming out in the public media to make citizens believe that social media is an ill, number one, and number two, that the information that we're getting on social media is actually fake news. Then the second question is for Delta, and it relates to social movements and public officials. You spoke quite strongly to issues relating to how you can actually get public officials to speak to issues that are around development. But my take is that developmental issues are also very political. If you look at political party manifestos during political campaigns, elections, do you honestly feel that the public officials that we get on social media respond in a manner that mainstream media can actually pick and run parallels with what the citizens are saying, so you effectively get good coverage because you don't have to actually go out into the streets to get these opinions? Do you feel that social media really is a platform where they can be honest and speak to development?
Delta, you've got those two questions. Okay, can the mic, Ezekiel, the lady, all right? And then I think this, okay.
Oh, can I go ahead
Yes,
and ask?
you can
Oh,
go
okay,
ahead.
thank you. My question would go to Mr. Chipare from MISA. Thank you for your contributions, but I seem to have missed in the gist of your presentation exactly how you are relating the current existing landscape of the media in SADC to internet freedom and making the link with access to information. So I've heard a lot of what you have done in terms of finding out what's happening in these various countries, but also I realize that there's a struggle between mainstream media and what is currently known as new media. So it's almost like they're competing against each other, and that's something that needs to be addressed, because then if it's not addressed, you have a situation where mainstream media discredits anything that is published online by a blogger or a social media influencer or whatever. They discredit it because they're looking at it from the perspective that we are the original media. So are you doing anything to kind of address that particular problem as MISA, because you have reach in different countries in the region? Thank you.
Ezekiel, I'm taking one last question. The lady here in the white blouse.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon to everyone. I'm from Bolivia, and I'm a journalist, and I work in political communication also, and I belong to ISOC Bolivia. I have listened carefully to Delta talk about advocacy journalism, which I think it's a new current of journalism in my country, and it's not that so accepted, the term, that practice. So I would like to ask you to emphasize which are the characteristics that differentiate this type of journalism, that I understand that it's mixed with activism, from political propaganda, that you already said that, but I want to know more, and if it could be practiced in all journalism genders. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to ask Delta. to engage first with the questions?
All right, no, thank you. So I'll start with the question on advocacy journalism. In typical print reporting, when journalists are being trained, they are given what are known as the 5 Ws and an H. So there is a ritual to how you cover the news, to make sure that you give equal voice and equal space to contradictory views. So you ask, sorry, so what do you think about this issue? You ask the other person. So at the end of it all, the idea is that because you now have plural voices, your story is more balanced. Right? So there is room for somebody to have an alternative view on the issue. But with advocacy journalism, you are taking the position that there is only one correct answer. Right? If we're saying rape is bad, that is the answer. We don't want to hear any other voice that's saying anything that's contrary to that. So you're taking a position, and the position that you're taking is informed by ideas around social justice. You decide what is the just thing. If the police are beating up vendors in the street, what is the just thing? You're not then going to look for people who are going to support vendors being beaten. Because your position is already clear that this is wrong, this is criminal, this is an abuse of human rights. So you can think of it in the perspective of being a rights-based approach to covering the stories of individuals. What are their rights? Have those rights been infringed upon? And if they have been, your duty then, what you're telling yourself is your duty is to defend those people. And typically, if you're supposed to be objective, it then means you're defending them strays from the standard of objectivity, right? So, and it strays from the standard of neutrality that you're supposed to maintain as a media practitioner. But with advocacy journalism, those standards, those ideals are suspended in pursuit of a greater goal, which is to do what is just, to side with those who've been oppressed or hurt or whose rights have been infringed upon. So I don't know if that captured it well. So the difference then would be with political, with propaganda, the goal is to prop up the elites, those who are oppressing others. So it's about rights at the end of the day. Whose rights are we protecting? As journalists, when we are quiet about certain issues, whose rights are we defending and whose rights are we infringing upon? Or whose rights are we undermining? You understand? Okay. And then I'm going to go to the question on blogging, right? My personal experience in blogging. In Zimbabwe, there's a community called the Kubatana Trust. So what they did is they created a platform for online activists. It was a platform where and it is a platform that you can still submit your articles on any issue happening anywhere in the country that's affecting your community. So by creating a centralized platform, it enabled activists around the country to have a shared frame of reference on what the issues were, what's going wrong, what's happening, what must be done. I remember one of the articles that I wrote was around the constitution-making process that had been going on in the country. And women were being sidelined from the process. And then leaders of the women's movement then did a protest during the deliberations. They disrupted everything. And the coverage in mainstream media was, these women are so disruptive. They don't want progress. This is why, so the idea was to make them seem like hooligans. That was the framing. To say this is such a serious issue. They want to come here and cry about women's things. Women's things can wait. Because we always defer women's issues. We're like, no, right now we're too busy. We have to deal with the economy. We have to deal with this. We'll get to the women. So in that instance, the women had then said, fine, if we're not included, then this process is not going on. So I was personally affected by the framing, the way these women had been framed. So I wrote an article to say, sometimes radicalism is the only way, really, to get your voice heard. Because you can only ask and say, please, with cherries on top for so long. At some point, you have to get mad, throw your toys, and say, okay, that's fine, then I'm not going to be cooperative. So that particular blog was then republished by several mainstream media, because I think it gave an alternative perspective on an issue that had been framed as, or is these women being disruptive? So blogging also allows us to be able to challenge those dominant mainstream media's narratives, especially in newsrooms where they are male-dominated. So the gaze, it's a male gaze, it's a male assessment of the issues, it's a male interpretation of the issues in ways that then downplay the issues that affect women or the issues that matter to women. And then you also asked whether blogging actually makes, whether it's popular in Zim and does it make any difference. And I would say the Zimbabwean scenario is very unique in that we had a great number of journalists losing their jobs and many of them leaving the country. And they've made their living by using online platforms. So for them, it was also a matter of survival. You need to survive, so what tools can you use? And how can you tell the Zimbabwean story from your perspective, from where you are? So there's been a growth in online news websites. Of course, there are lots of challenges with those in terms of maybe poor standards of verification and ethical issues as well, unnamed sources, etc., etc. But mainly because there was such a huge pool of talented journalists that were unemployed, it just started to then flourish in terms of the blogging. And most of the blogging that happens is around social issues mostly, because people shy away from politics. You know, they self-censor, you want to protect yourself, so you're careful about what you blog about. So I don't know if that addresses what you had raised. And then my big sister, who asks very difficult questions. We are going to have a drink over this. Okay. Do public officials really listen to social media commentators? Can social media commentators force the hand of a public official? Not exactly. I think that's why I then had to emphasize mainstream media. Because I feel that the media that the elite fear or revere at the moment is mainstream media. If a reporter from mainstream media typically calls a minister and says, I'm calling you from this media house, it's something that really affects them. Like, okay, what do they want to say? Now they want to write lies. What are they going to say? So there is that sense of, I'm about to be held accountable. But they wouldn't have that same attitude towards social media. Most of them are not on social media. Most of them don't think social media is a big deal until what is being said on social media appears on mainstream media. So if you, maybe, for example, the VP responding to social media stories about how he says he was poisoned by ice cream from the First Family's company. So these were social media like stories, like, yeah, you know, they tried to kill him. He ate this ice cream. And it forced the whole VP to say, okay, you know what? Because mainstream media was carrying these allegations. Now I have to do damage control. It's the same thing with the panic around the cash crisis and the panic buying. The social media conversations around that were so heated and they escalated so quickly in 48 hours that it forced the RBZ to respond, the government to respond, the president to bail or something from wherever he was, to say, can we have order there? But it was not because social media said it. It was because mainstream media reported what social media was saying. Mainstream media said, yay, you know, these people on social media are so angry, they're saying this, they're saying that. And it affects the individuals who are custodians of those particular sectors or those particular issues, or who've been entrusted with sorting out those kind of issues. So at the moment, I wouldn't say social media would have that direct impact on elites. They are insulated by power, by money, and by the fact that they are untouchables. And even mainstream media can't touch them really, but it can shame them because it has had years of practice, I suppose. So I don't know if that addresses the question more or less.
Thank you for that, Delta. Koliwe, I'm sure that discussion can be taken sorry? Discussion can be taken beyond this fora. But I also think what I'm happy that you raised is how social media platforms can be used to break certain stories or to put certain things into the public, and how the mass media can build further on and take it beyond that. So we should look at how we can use all forms of media to get our story out there and to hold people accountable, but at the same time to inform citizens what is happening around them and why it's important for them to know as it affects them and how it affects them. I'm going to hand over to Frans to, your question. Someone asked a question to Frans. Oh,
That's
yes.
fine. I'm good.
Okay, thanks.
I'll be brief because I know we're sitting between you and lunch. This issue of fake news, right? I mean, I was using the term quite loosely because it's the one that most people recognize. There's a whole debate about exactly how you define it and what it is. I hope I'm understanding you correctly, but certainly if you're saying that misinformation and propaganda is not unique to social media, absolutely. I mean, it's not a new thing, it's been around forever. What is interesting to ask is what is new? And I think it is, and again, it's something we could spend a lot of time on, but it is, I think, about the ability to create things that look like news and can take people in, and to use the kind of viral nature of social media to spread them out. I mean, it's a very big subject about what exactly this is and where it is and where it isn't. But I think, as you say, the main point that I was trying to make is that we have to be conscious that there are new techniques being used to fool people, and that's something to worry about.
And then I'm handing over to you. There was a question.
Yeah. Yeah, I think just briefly, the gist of my presentation really is to say you can do advocacy. And we have an experience of what we have done over the years, regionally and nationally and that sort of thing, and how to make it work. And that's what I was sharing. But I think just to briefly say that with respect to the issues that have been raised directly now, what we are saying is that what are the challenges that we have to deal with respect to advocacy around SDGs? And what we are saying is that, one, the challenge of access to information that I've addressed with respect to how we are advocating that, the policy framework, and how then to monitor, which is very important. I think the other thing is with respect to the challenges is that while what we have is a situation where our governments have agreed on certain principles and standards, it is now up to us, the citizens, and those of us who are calling themselves human rights defenders, to actually look at mechanisms of ensuring that these things are then monitored with respect to the progress. And with respect to information, one of the major sources of information is media. Our work with media has been around ensuring that the media is free, is independent, is pluralistic. And I've given you the reports that we actually put out every year around World Press Freedom Day. And now the reports that we are also doing now with the transparency reports that we have issued today. What is important is that you, from your various sectors, can set up mechanisms of ensuring that these SDGs that our governments have agreed to are monitored with respect to progress. And we can have conversations on how we can help in terms of making sure the mechanisms for monitoring are done, as I've indicated in my presentation. Lastly, I think one of the most critical issues that I didn't talk about, but is very important, is that there must be ways in which the safety and protection of whistleblowers is in place. Because citizens who are going to take up these issues are going to find themselves facing the wrath of those policymakers or those state actors or even non-state actors that are not happy with what they are going to be producing. It is important that we as citizens be aware that our laws must provide for protection of those that are going to be whistleblowers, providing information around the misuse or otherwise of resources, particularly public resources. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the panelists now. I think we can give them a great round of applause. You're going to go for lunch, but just before you go for lunch, I know we've started eating into your time. I think the following session after lunch is going to be quite crucial because it's taking this discussion further, understanding SDGs and the issues for media advocacy, and that will be in breakaway room 2. And then the last session, 14:45, how can media be more engaged to support the SDGs implementation? So I feel both those sessions that's going to run concurrently is taking this discussion further, and I think you should be in it. Okay. Go and enjoy your lunch now. Thanks. Thank you, guys. Ezekiel?
Just a word. For lunch, we're going outside. I think there are 2 serving points. At least I was told about 2 serving points. One in the garden, one in the main restaurant, or the hotel restaurant. You just need your tag. There is no coupon. Just bring your name tag, and then you will have your lunch. So, bon appetit.